Welcome to the Writer Reads the Strays of Lunar One. This is Book 2, The Unwanted, Chapter 7, On Board the Booster. The restraints were gone when Oliver woke again. He felt for them, making sure they were absent before coming slowly upright and checking his surroundings. Anxiety warred with nausea when he found he was alone, and he cautiously swung his feet over the edge of the bed. San, he muttered, not seeing one in the narrow confines of his cabin. He fumbled through the likely spaces on the wall opposite, reaching the rear wall before he discovered what he was looking for. It was compact enough for the walls to brush his shoulders, but there was waste disposal and a shower. Now I just need a replicator, he muttered, registering the gown he wore and his bare feet. And my boots. The door to his cabin hissed open and he pivoted, coming face to face with the medic from the cargo bay. How do you feel? He asked. Where's Lewis? Oliver countered. The man frowned and leaned on the doorframe. Do your trade. You answer mine, I'll answer yours. How about, Oliver began, then noticed the needler in the man's hand. He sighed. Fine. I feel fine. Not what your readings are saying, the medic noted. Oliver frowned. Maybe your machine is broke. Lewis? Your partner? Oliver nodded. My partner, where? He's in isolation until he comes out of it. But he will. The medic shook his head. My turn. How do you really feel? Oliver was about to tell him he really felt fine until he noticed the nausea hadn't gone away. He hit the SAN unit on his knees, wondering how he could have missed that before. It kind of sneaks up on you, doesn't it? The medic asked, and Oliver swore the man was amused. He'd have liked to flip him the bird, but he needed his hands for support. The man was still leaning on the door when Oliver was done. Come with me, he ordered. Doc wants to check you over. Oliver went, or he started to. After another rapid dash to the sand, he was ready. Is this normal? He asked when he'd rinsed his mouth, and the medic nodded. For one of that bloodline, and with wereblood, it's pretty standard. Then remind me not to do it again, Oliver replied, and the man snorted. You sure you won't be able to remember it yourself? I remembered it this time. He shrugged. But you know how it is. The client is always right, the medic finished for him. I know. I'll remind the client that dead retrieval specialists won't net him more than a funeral bill. You charge? For cremation and correct disposal? Of course we do, just like we charge for any extra care required. Oliver's heart sank. Carnelian didn't strike him as the kind of man to absorb those costs himself. The medical centre was quiet, and the doc was a tall, spare man with firm hands and a mild manner. Oliver didn't let it fool him for 1 minute. He'd met men like this before, and didn't want to get on the wrong side of this one. Complete rest for today, he ordered, studying the readouts. Light training tomorrow. You can go back to full duties the day after. As if he was anywhere in Oliver's command structure. Did my gear make it aboard? He asked, and the doc looked at the medic. Mika? I'll check, but it might have been sent on for collection at Gertax. Or it might already be aboard the booster's squire, the doc added, leaving Oliver to wonder who Booster was and why he needed a squire. The doc tapped Oliver on the shoulder. You can go. Mika will take you to stores for some clothes. What you were wearing couldn't be salvaged. My boots? The doc rolled his eyes. Those we did manage to keep. You'll find them in stores. Oliver felt some of his tension ease. Those boots had been with him a long time and would have been hard to replace. The doc shook his head, watching him as he stood. What? Oliver asked. It's always the boots, the doc explained. When it's not the blasters, Mika added, and Oliver frowned. He liked his blaster, damn it. The medics took one look at his expression and started to snicker. Oliver decided he didn't want to know, and Mika signaled he should follow. Stores was a short trip down the corridor and 2 levels. Nettle's liability covers replacement on an equivalency basis, Mika told him, and Oliver got ready to barter more of his hard-earned creds for better. What Carnelians had supplied was good enough if you were a technician setting up for a regular day's work, but he needed something more. We'll need some body armor, he stated, if you have any. The supply clerk looked him up and down. I can do light and I can do replicator, and it'll still cost you. Oliver looked down at the medical gown and managed a crooked smile. It'll still be better than what I'm wearing now, and that replacement gear will fit nicely underneath. How much? The stores clerk named a figure that would take his funds down by a quarter, and he still had Lewis to outfit. He countered it with an offer half again, and the clerk snorted, folding his arms and leaning on the wall behind him. Micah groaned and stalked over to a chair set against one wall. I'll be over here if you need me, he grumbled, and Oliver stepped up to the counter and started bartering in earnest. He'd just narrowed the total cost down to a third of his credit stack when Lewis was guided gently into the centre. Let me guess, Oliver quipped. You're on rest for today and can't do more than light duties until tomorrow? His smile faded as Lewis shook his head. Rest for 3 days and light duties for the 3 after, and then I need to check in with whatever medical officer is closest. Well, at least that explains the escort, Oliver thought, taking in the woman hovering at Lewis's side. She caught his glance and returned it with a solemn stare. Lewis came up beside him. How's the resupply going? Oliver jerked a thumb at the stores officer. They're replacing our civvies, and I've bartered for a couple of sets of light armor. We're talking weapons next. Lewis stared at him. But our gear didn't come aboard with you, the supply officer told him shortly, so it doesn't get replaced. He jettisoned it? Lewis asked, meaning the courier pilot who delivered them. Oliver shrugged. Probably not, but you saw how much space was inside that thing. I don't even know how they got both of us into the hull. And you don't want to, Micah muttered darkly. The supply officer snorted. I could show you pictures. Lewis opened his mouth to speak, and Oliver laid a hand on his shoulder. He charges like a wounded bull, he warned, and Lewis subsided. The supply officer shot him a filthy look, and Oliver returned it with a smile. Now, he said, let's talk blasters. It turned out that Crawshell had a weapons locker policy, at least when it came to guests. Oliver thought about arguing, but he wanted to see his purchases again, so he handed them over, relieved to receive an itemized collection chit in return. While our guests' comfort and convenience are important, Micah informed them, ship security must take precedence. You are not our only passengers. That was news to Oliver, but Micah preempted his next question. Like you, they value their privacy, he stated, and I need to escort you to quarters now. The doctor's instruction was that you should rest for the remainder of the day. Oliver wondered what that meant for meals, but that question was answered when Micah didn't return them to the cabins they'd woken up in. Instead, he took them to a different deck and a small suite. Crawshells requests you remain in your cabin so we can ensure your security, as well as your health and safety, he told them once they were inside. He waved a hand to indicate the rest of the cabin. All facilities and materials available are covered by the cost of transport. If there's anything else you require, you can order it if it's available. From that, Oliver got they were confined to quarters for the rest of the journey. Their escort's next words confirmed it. You'll be sent an escort when it's time to debark and a warning ahead of their arrival so you're ready. Lewis opened his mouth and then closed it again. The woman escorting him laid a hand on his arm. Let's get you to bed, Mr. Havisham. Oliver watched as Lewis's head snapped around. The woman smiled and quirked her eyebrow at him, and Lewis gave her a crooked smile in return. He didn't even grace Oliver with a glance as the woman took him through the door to his quarters and closed it behind them. Micah followed Oliver's stunned gaze and shrugged. It's been a long trip, and it's her choice. He must be a nice guy. Nice enough, Oliver allowed, and wondered if it was too late to do the jealous boyfriend bit. Micah didn't seem to care. He indicated the door opposite. Your cabin's that way. My instructions are to see you into it and resting per the doc's orders. His expression challenged Oliver to say something referring to Lewis and his colleague, but Oliver shook his head. I can tuck myself in, he said, and the man gave him a hard stare. Good, because I wasn't going to offer. Resting is resting. Oliver jerked a thumb at Lewis's closed door. Tell that to them. Micah sighed and gestured toward his cabin, and Oliver went, stretching out on the single bunk before rolling to face the wall and closing his eyes. He didn't relax until he heard Micah move back and let the door close between them. Rest wasn't as hard to come by as he'd expected, and Lewis was standing in the kitchenette when he emerged. The man looked well rested despite his activities of the day before. Of the medic, there was no sign. What did you do with her? Oliver asked, and Lewis gave him a sly smile. A gentleman doesn't kiss and tell, he replied, and Oliver rolled his eyes. Not that. I mean, where is she? Oh, that. She had to go back to work. He waved a mug in Oliver's direction. Coffee? It's not on the list of things we have to pay for? Lewis shook his head. Nope, it's in the inclusions list. Or at least that's what I'm assuming its availability means. Wouldn't want our dear Nettles to get slapped with any extra charges now, would we? No, Oliver told him acerbically. Especially not when they've got access to our new accounts and can pass it on. Good point. Lewis turned back and poured a second coffee. Replicator has steak. And eggs? Lewis checked. And eggs, and bacon, and. We could make ourselves a pretty decent burger out of this. Oliver gave him a broad smile. Yes, but how many can it turn out in the next 3 minutes? Enough for a half dozen each, Lewis replied, punching in the required settings without needing to be asked. And it can turn out a half dozen more while we get through those. He settled back against the bench, sipping his coffee. Oliver took the cup he offered and rested his butt against the back of the lounge. You're still on rest duty, aren't you? Yep. Lewis paused a moment and then grinned. But there won't be any more resting after Solar gets off shift. Oliver shook his head. I don't want to know. Lewis chuckled. What did Mr. Sulky Britches have to say? Mr. Sulky Britches? Lewis shrugged. The guy that was standing with you when we came into the stores section. Pfft. He said it had been a long flight and was her decision. Lewis looked surprised. Seriously? Yeah. Any reason he would have said otherwise? It's not what she expected, is all, Lewis replied. Oliver raised his hands. Not my problem. They sipped their coffees quietly, starting when the replicator jangled to let them know their order was done. Lewis split the pile onto 2 plates and handed him one. So, he said, how long do you think it's going to take for us to get to the transition point? No idea, Oliver told him, but that's next on my list of light duties, to check in with Mr. Carnelian and see how long this leg is going to take, and what his instructions are when we get there. I didn't hear them offering you the use of a tank, Lewis reminded him. I'll check on that too, Oliver replied. He didn't mention that he wasn't feeling as well as he might, or that he could feel things starting to shift in his chest. He wondered if any of the time he'd spent unconscious had included being in a med box. Some of those seizures. Taking his plate over to the table, he sat down, pulling a terminal out of a shelf in the wall as he went. Mr. Carnelian was not available, but his head goon was. Oliver guessed the guy had more uses than they'd had a chance to see, especially when he was able to give him the information he was looking for. You'll be on board the Crawshell for another 43 hours. They'll escort you onto the station and over to the Squire, where you'll find your gear once you board. It was not able to be shipped with you. Remembering the hold space he'd seen, Oliver thought, I just bet it wasn't. The goon caught his look and misinterpreted it. You will find it intact and present, he stated, sounding somewhat defensive. Good to know, Oliver replied, catching Lewis's look of doubt across the table and glad his second wasn't anywhere in the pickup. And the trip to Axis 58? It's a freighter, the goon explained as though Oliver needed it spelt out. That leg will take you 8 days, of which you'll spend 1 in a tank. A regen tank? Oliver asked. Correct. Mr. Carnelian says to inform you that you have 24 standard hours of regen tank time owing as your bonus for early completion. But 12 if I want nanites to speed the healing, Oliver asked. Yes, but they won't be military grade, the guard cautioned. They should be enough, Oliver replied, adding, Does this tank time include my beta as well? Of course. You're both instrumental in discovering the location ahead of time. The offered reward is extended to you both. And we can't take it up prior to arriving at the shard? Crawshell is adequately equipped, the guard told him cautiously, but the expense of them providing the service would halve the time. Oliver frowned. In that case, we'll wait. He watched as the guard lifted his gaze to look over the top of his console, saw his eyes shift as he listened to a voice he couldn't hear. When whoever it was had finished speaking, the guard came back to the screen. Mr. Carnelian wishes to know how your recovery is coming along. Doesn't he receive reports? Oliver asked. Only after the transaction is complete, the guard replied. In that case, tell him extra steps had to be taken to ensure our recovery, and that my beta will still be on rest orders when we transfer to the Squire. The guard glanced beyond his station again before giving him a thin-lipped smile. Then it is a good thing you've both earned your tank time, isn't it? Oliver had to agree, but he wasn't happy about it. He scowled at the guard, who ignored the look. Is there anything else? I can't think of anything. Then we'll contact you just prior to your arrival on Axis 58, the man said shortly, and ended the call. Well, that told me then, didn't it? Oliver muttered, staring at the blank screen. He opened up the navigation screen to the Crawshell's entertainment net, and beyond half a dozen publicly available games, discovered it had very little free content to offer, and information searches were off limits. Access denied flashed onto the screen when he tried, and he sat back in his seat. I need the gym, he muttered, and Lewis snorted. Pretty sure the gym doesn't classify as light duties, he said. Oliver wagged a finger at him. If you don't look too closely at my idea of light duties, I won't criticize your idea of resting, he warned, and Lewis raised his hands, pushing back his chair. Speaking of which, he said, I really need to go lie down. The replicator chimed a second time, and they both turned toward it. Right after I finish round 2, Lewis amended, grabbing his plate. By the time they'd demolished the second round of steak burgers, Oliver had to agree with his beta. They both needed to sleep. Catch you at dinner, he said, pausing in his doorway once their dishes were cleared. Lewis flashed him a cheeky grin. You'll be eating on your own tonight, he informed Oliver. Solar's off shift by then. Oliver rolled his eyes and stepped into his room. I don't want to know, he groaned.